Now we shall treat Numbers chapter 30. Now, this book of Numbers brings in a new dimension of instructions to this new generation of Israel. And it talks majorly about vows, and both the vow of a man and then the vows of a woman. The vows of a man, God made it clear in this chapter that when you make a vow unto God as a man, you are bound to fulfill it. However, when you make a vow to God as a woman, there are exceptions that you can be that you may not be bound by your vow. And so many of these chapters I shall read them so that you can follow with me and understand, the meat of this chapter. And verse 1 to verse 1 and verse 2, then I'll jump to around verse 7. And Moses spake unto the heads of the tribes concerning the children of Israel, saying, This is the thing which the Lord has commanded. If any man vow a vow unto the Lord, or swear an oath to bind his soul with a bond, he shall not break his word. He shall do according to all that proceeded out of his mouth. So this is even important for us believers. Paul was speaking in Romans 10. He says, If thou shalt confess with thy mouth and shalt believe in your heart that God raised him from the dead, thou shalt be saved. For with the heart man believeth unto righteousness, and with the mouth confession is made unto salvation. So vows are like the words of your confessions that you made to God and you got saved. God says if you make a vow, he said you must fulfill that vow if you are a man, according to the Levitical priesthood and according to the laws of the Pentateuch, the 5 books of Moses. When you make a vow as a man, you have to fulfill it. However, when it comes to a woman, God made another instructions by which a woman may be free from that vow. And I'll read verse 3 and 4. If a woman also vow a vow unto the Lord and bind herself by a bond, being in her father's house in her youth, that is, if she's young, and her father hear her vow and her bond wherein she had bound her soul, and her father shall hold his peace to her, then all her vows shall stand, and every bond wherein she had bound her soul shall stand. So what this means is that if a woman makes a vow while she's still single and in her father's house, then the father can be responsible for that vow. If the father keeps quiet when he was hearing her make that vow, then that vow which she has made will stand. However, if the father speaks up that time and say, no, don't make this vow, I cancel this vow that you have made, what God says there is that if our father disallows it, when he hears it, or if our vows where we shall bound ourselves shall stand, and the Lord shall forgive her because our father disallowed it. That's verse 5. It says if the father hears that vow and he disallowed that vow, it says then that vow is null and void, is not binding. But if the father hears the child, the daughter, making that vow, and the father kept quiet, but God says that vow becomes legal and binding, and the father is obligated to make sure that that vow is fulfilled. Now, what about when the woman is married? Because this last one was when the woman is single. So I read verse 6 to 8 for those who are the married women of that time. It says, and if she had at all an husband, when she vowed and uttered out of her lips, wherewith she bound her soul, and her husband heard it, and held his peace at her in the day that they heard it, then her vows shall stand, and her bonds wherewith she bound her soul shall stand. But if her husband disallowed her on that day that they heard it, then he shall make a vow which she vowed, and that which she uttered with her lips, wherewith she bound her soul of none effect, and the Lord shall forgive her. So what this passage is saying is that if a married woman makes a vow and the husband hears when she makes that vow and he keeps quiet, God says that vow is binding on the woman, and the husband must make sure it is fulfilled, even if he has to. But if when the woman was making that vow, the husband comes in and says, no, I disallow that vow, God says that vow is disallowed, automatically is not binding. And then in the last few verses of 9 to 16, now talks about if a woman is widowed or divorced and she makes a vow, what happens? I read verse 9. But every vow of a widow and of her that is divorced, wherewith they have bound their soul, it says, shall stand against her. So a vow that a widow or a divorced person makes is a vow that stands. Hallelujah. And then, so that concludes this particular chapter 30. It's just majorly about vows. The vow of a man must stand. The vow of a widow or a divorced woman must stand because there's no husband. The vow of a child, of a young lady who is not yet married, living in her father's house, it stands when the father hears it and did not disallow it. If he disallow it, it is not binding. For a married woman, if the husband hears her when she makes the vow and keeps quiet, that vow is binding. But if the husband hears it and disallows that vow, God says that vow becomes null and void. It's not binding on that particular woman. Hallelujah. So let's move on to chapter 31 at the next series. God bless you.